Hi cherry pies. Today I've got some stuff to say on the subject of anger. This is another one of my most highly requested videos. Much like the cultural appropriation subject, anger is something that I've been consistently asked to speak on in a video for a long time. And even though I've touched on it in certain other videos, I know that I haven't dedicated a video specifically to the topic of anger. And that's mostly because I overthought it a lot, because it's something that's so important to me and that's been so intrinsic to my own journey. And I was telling myself that I had to get everything into this video and I had to make it so perfect and everything had to be so cohesive, and I just had to make sure that I said everything I needed to say. And it started to just become a little bit of a pressure thing for me, where I told myself that I just couldn't do this video because I couldn't get it right and it wasn't going to be everything that it needed to be for it to be useful. And then I kind of went through this stage where I thought, you know what, I can just say what I need to say right now in this moment, and if there's anything else that I need to add in the future, and no doubt there will be, I can come back and I can say those things then. But I feel like I don't want to delay anymore on talking about this topic because it is really important. It's been, like I said, a pretty important part of my journey as an individual. It's been an important part of my spiritual journey. It's been something that's really affected me, and I want to say a few things about it that I hope will be helpful to anyone who's dealing with their own anger, somebody else's anger, or just wondering how anger fits into the emotional spectrum for them and what they can do about any issues they're dealing with regarding this really complex, very powerful, very intense, very overwhelming emotion. I don't remember being angry in my childhood. I don't remember being a specifically really angry child. I don't remember getting into rages. My mum did not tell me that I had really terrible tantrums or anything like that. I definitely lashed out a couple of times when I was younger, but it wasn't something that was chronic. It wasn't something that was picked up on by parents or adult templates around me, if you will, adult figures around me. So I can tell you with certainty that the time that I actually really became enraged and started to fully give myself to anger and kind of lose myself to anger was in my early teens. And this went on right through until my late teens, right until I would say the verge of being 20 years old. I was just addicted to rage. I really was addicted to letting myself go all the way to the edge, and then I'd boot myself off the edge and I would just be so angry, so incensed, so overwhelmed. I was seeing red. And it was something that became a really common occurrence. My mother has told me since then that she was terrified of me in my teens. She was terrified of me potentially being violent towards myself or somebody else. Living with me was like walking on eggshells all the time, and I'm sure my siblings felt the same at certain times. I was definitely really, really volatile. I would lose it for no apparent reason that anybody could fathom, and it was just really not pleasant. It wasn't a pleasant experience for anyone else, and looking back, it wasn't a pleasant experience for me, because even though I was addicted to the rage and the anger, I was addicted to that release for definite. At the same time, I didn't want to be that person, and I knew that I wasn't that person. And I definitely used to experience sorrow and regret after a really violent rage had taken place, after like an all-consuming anger had taken place, and I'd exhibited that anger to someone or another. It wasn't just about being angry alone, because I was also a self-harmer, and a lot of the time when I was on my own, I released my emotion through harming myself, through using blades and cutting myself. But when I was around other people, it seemed to be that I was much more likely to go into a rage as a form of protection, as a way to defend myself, and also as a way to intimidate or manipulate other people. So it was definitely the case that I was mostly self-harming, but when I went into rages around other people, it definitely wasn't a negligible thing. It was definitely something that was scary for the people around me, and it was dramatic, and I was very loud and very screechy, and I kicked things and I broke holes in things. I was never actually violent towards anyone. My mum said that I was violent towards her on one occasion in my pre-teens, but that wasn't really at a time when the rage was chronic, so I'm not really sure whether or not I just felt like she was up in my face and I needed to do something to defend myself or not. I'm not sure, but I know that when I was going into violent rages on a very regular basis, and it was kind of a common occurrence for me, it wasn't that I was violent towards other people. I was extremely intimidating towards other people. People were afraid of me, definitely, but I didn't lash out violently. I was more violent in my energy towards people and my attitude towards people, and the way that I let people know in no uncertain terms that it wasn't worth fucking with me. And that was a really common occurrence, and it was a well-known part of my character. Some of my anger was nature and some of it was nurture. I definitely had reasons for feeling that rage. I definitely had a lot of emotions that I needed to process and I needed to get out of me. I definitely had a lot of things that I felt really bitter about and that I felt there was no other way to express. I was very mixed up, I was very messed up, there was a lot going on, but I also do acknowledge that there is definitely a streak of that running through me, you know, hereditarily speaking. I definitely acknowledge both of these things as being part and parcel of the overall issue. I definitely think that I still have a very angry streak in me now. I definitely have a short fuse. But when I was 19 years old, I realised just exactly how damaging this behaviour was and how terrifying it was for the people that I loved and how unpleasant it was for me. And I just started to really look at myself in the mirror. And I think that this was partly because of somebody that I was with in my teens romantically, who was so zen in comparison to me and so capable of handling things without going into rages. I definitely let him get close enough to me to show me that my behaviour wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. It didn't have to be something that happened. It could be something that I could control. And I also started reading about meditation. My uncle Seth taught me a little bit about meditation and spoke to me about the benefits of meditation, not in relation to my violent rages so much, but just on the off chance, just kind of coincidentally. And it really resonated with me and I really listened to him. And I thought to myself, meditation might be a good thing. And then I read an article about men in maximum security jail for violent crime who had started doing meditation and using it as a tool to kind of relax them and help them to gain a sense of perspective and control, and it had really, really worked for them. And people had kind of come in and researched it and watched the experiments unfolding and found that it had just been really incredible for them, really positive. So that really piqued my interest as well. So I started meditating when I was about 19, and it was really because of a specific incident where I lost it with my young brother. My brother is about 5 years younger than me, and I just totally lost it with him one day, and he was just really, really freaked out and really upset, and I was towering over him and I was giving him shit. And then I went back to my bedroom and I looked in the mirror and I thought, what the fuck are you doing? This is not who you want to be. And I really felt at that time in my life like I was very, very close to punching someone in the face. And I had managed to refrain from being violent in situations before where people had been violent with me or threatened violence towards me. And I had actually managed to refrain from being violent in return. I'd managed to actually kind of make sure that I didn't take it to that level. But I knew at that age, in my late teens, that I was becoming less and less of a sure thing where that was concerned. I knew that I was becoming somebody that was more likely to respond in a violent way, physically violent, towards people who were being physically violent towards me. And I knew that I couldn't go down that road. I mean, obviously, I always want the ability to be able to defend myself from violence. I want the ability to be violent. I'm not an out-and-out 100% pacifist. I want to be able to defend myself. But at the same time, I knew that in this particular situation where I had nearly resorted to violence myself, I could easily have walked away in that situation. And I did walk away in that situation, but it was difficult to do so, you know? So I was aware that I was definitely coming to a point of no return where I was going to switch over into being violent towards others rather than actually taking the violent feelings out on myself via self-harm. So I knew I had to do something. I knew something had to give. And the meditation was so helpful. It was really healthy for me. And I look back at that time in my life and I know that I was still quite messed up and I still had quite a lot of things going on. I'm really almost highly surprised that at the age of 19, I had that inner dialogue with myself and I decided that, you know what, no, I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm out of alignment with what I truly know that I am. I'm going to have to do something. And it surprises me as well that I chose something spiritual, because even though I had had my phases of believing that I was a witch and really connecting with that word, at the age of 19 I was not at all connected to that word and I did not feel spiritual at all. So it was really strange that I decided that something spiritual would be the prescription for my rage and my anger. But I think that just goes to show exactly how authentic that side of me is, that it would come through at that time where I was really at breaking point and I really needed something. One of the things that I realised about my anger was that there was a lot of things behind it. I realised that anger is a gateway, and I recognised that through doing meditation. I started to realise that that I had sadness behind my anger. I had feelings of alienation and marginalization behind my anger. I felt abandoned behind my anger. I was angry for different things than I thought I was angry for. So it was very revealing. I didn't know what was going to happen when I started my meditation practice. I had no real expectations. I wanted to be really realistic about it. But one thing that happened was that I created space for these realizations to come through. I created the space and the quietness that I needed to really recognize what was behind these feelings that I was having. And I realized that there were a lot of other emotions behind these exhibitions of anger that I was coming out with. I realized that a lot of my anger was fear. I realised that a lot of my anger was just me kind of plugging up other things that I didn't want to feel because I was too scared to feel them. I realised that anger felt safe, it felt empowering, it felt like it made me untouchable, but actually underneath it all there was a lot of stuff that hadn't been processed, that was being suppressed, that I did need to kind of come to and really figure out. So it was definitely well worth doing. Giving myself over to a practice of meditation actually eventually led me back towards the witchy side of things. So I would say that about the age of 15 I fell away from the witchy stuff. I stopped doing it. I stopped being interested in it. There was just too much else going on in my life. I was experiencing really bad mental health issues. The situation at home was not good for various reasons, and I really just fell away from that part of me, and I went into kind of a survival mode then. And it wasn't until I was 19 when I started meditating that I really felt like this weird feeling that a part of me had been lying dormant, and I really needed to get back to that part of me. And then when I was about 21, 22, I claimed the word witch again. And it was still an even rockier road from not claiming it again and then claiming it again. I definitely wasn't done with my exploration of the power of that word and exactly how intrinsic it was to my identity and how much I wanted to claim it and the problems that I had with claiming it. But definitely after starting to meditate, it was only a year and a half, maybe 2 years before I realised that I wanted more in my practice and I wanted to come back to ritual and spellcraft and all that kind of thing. So it was a really good thing. It was a gateway to returning back to something that felt very authentic for me spiritually as well. The problems that lay behind my anger were problems that I really needed to address and I needed to see. I was angry about the feeling of needing to win approval from a parent. I was angry about the feeling of being rejected and feeling like one of my parents chose a partner over me and over my mental well-being. I was angry about having to swallow and hide and suppress and downplay the mental health issues I was going through. I was angry about watching a parent go through emotional abuse and not being able to do anything about it. I was angry about the crappy energies in my home. I was angry about the arguments between the adults that were supposed to be raising me. I was angry about so much shit. And I was also taking on other people's anger. I was doing people's anger for them. I was really absorbing the anger of my parental figures and the people around me. I was absorbing the anger from the family dynamic, and I was playing it out in my own life and in my own behaviours. And I can only see that now with the benefit of hindsight, but meditation started me on that road to being able to see those things. Meditation was in no way a instant cure for me. Meditation was in no way a prescription that I discovered that made everything okay for me, and I never needed to go back and do any more work on myself, and I never had another violent rage again. I never kicked anything again. I never threw anything again. I never said anything I didn't mean to somebody again. None of that was instantaneous, and none of it was this lovely idealized romantic version of what it should be to suddenly have a realization about yourself and then understand, you know, that you can do things in a different way. It was absolutely so much more complex than that. It was so much more slow going than that. And I want to make that really clear because I don't want to come across like meditation was this cure and everything was better after that. Actually, there were so many different challenges and experiences that I went through which gave me the opportunity to put into practice the things that I had realised and learned during meditation and actually come to see the progress as these challenges arose. So it wasn't a case of like I had no challenges anymore and that was it and everything was hunky fucking dory. It was more like the challenges were something that I sincerely welcomed because they gave me the opportunity to put into practice what I had actually been discovering in meditation. And it took a really, really long time, a long time for me to come to this point where I knew that just because I feel a certain feeling doesn't mean I have to enact that feeling in front of people. And it doesn't mean that that feeling has to overtake me. And it doesn't mean that that feeling is the fucking truth. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a barometer for the truth just because I feel it really, really deeply. It doesn't necessarily give me this lens of what's authentic in the real world. Sometimes the emotion comes purely from things that are in my fucking head and I've misread the situation. Sometimes the emotion is actually way bigger than is actually necessary for dealing with what's going on, and I can appreciate that and accept that now. But it took time. It took a hell of a lot of time, baby cakes. And if you're going through this now, where you're realizing that anger is taking over, you're becoming absorbed by it, it's swallowing you up, I want you to know that starting a practice right now from today of being conscious of what's going on, being aware of it and choosing differently is going to be a way better option for you than just deciding that a few sessions of meditation isn't going to make the immediate difference, so you're not going to do it. It's probably not going to make the immediate difference, but you know what? It's going to make a lot more of a difference than you just deciding that this is the way things are, this is the way things are going to carry on, and you're not going to do anything to try and set it right. I don't think that anger is unspiritual. I don't think that anger is fundamentally unethical. I don't think we should suppress our anger. I think there is a place for anger to be registered and there is a place for anger to be expressed. I think that what I was doing was mismanaging my anger. I was misdirecting my anger, and I was letting my anger write the whole story for me. I was sending it to the wrong places. I was giving it too much power, and I was also using it to make myself feel bolstered, make myself feel safe, make myself feel powerful. And that was all a bunch of bullshit. It didn't make me powerful at all. I was a slave to it. I needed it. I felt like I needed it to convince myself that I was okay and that no one could touch me, no one could hurt me, no one could ever hurt me again. And actually, what I recognised in my late teens was that I was hurting everyone around me that I did not want to hurt. I was causing pain where I didn't want to be causing pain. In a lot of ways, I was actually becoming a lot of the energy that had fucked me up in the first place. I was actually turning into the very thing that I had originally been responding to. Because like I said, there were reasons why I was angry. There were situations that unfolded in my life and figures who came into my life who made me feel this rage and this anger, who, you know, were the catalyst for it. But I realised that I was actually becoming so much more like those energies that I was angry about and that I was trying to outrun. And I knew that that couldn't stand. I knew that I didn't want my life to turn out like that. And even though it might have happened young for me, it can happen at any time. This realization that one has that they don't want to carry on down this road anymore, they can have that realization at any time in life, and it is never too late. Any age at which you have that realization is the right age to have that realization. It's never too fucking late to decide you're going to live your life in a different way, and you're not going to use anger as a shield anymore to keep you safe from whatever you think it is that's going to harm you. During my sessions of meditation, I started to realize that I didn't necessarily have to express my anger directly to the person who had made me feel the anger in the first place, who'd harmed me, you know, who demeaned me. If there was a specific person that I was thinking about when I was angry, or that I was wanting to direct the anger towards, my realization was that that person didn't even have to be involved in my processing of that anger. The person I was angry with didn't even have to factor into the fucking equation. And that was so deep for me. That was such a meaningful part of my explorations. That was such a meaningful part of creating the space in meditation for understandings to come through. So many people tell themselves that if they can't direct their anger specifically towards the person that they feel caused the pain, then it's like they're never going to be able to get rid of it. They're never going to be able to disperse it. And that's bullshit, because what do you do about people that are dead? You know, if the person who tormented you or rejected you or abused you is dead, how do you recover from that anger? How do you get over it? Do you just never get over it because that person is no longer with us? There has to be a way for a person to heal if the person who abused them is no longer on this plane, is actually passed on. There has to be a way for that person to be able to get release and to be able to move on. And there is a way. There are so many ways. It's a total myth that you need to have that anger be validated and heard and acknowledged by the person that you feel caused it. And that was amazing for me. That's not to say that there's never any situation where you should direct your anger towards a person. Obviously, there are loads of situations in everyday life where we direct our anger towards a person that we feel is the cause of our anger, that we want to direct our anger towards. And we want to help that person either to understand why we're angry, or we just want to vent our frustrations at that person. And whether it's right for us to do that or whether it's not so healthy for us to do that, it happens a lot. But what I'm saying is that you don't need to do that to heal. You don't need the person you're angry with to validate your anger, to hold space for your anger, to stand there in front of you while you vent your anger. You don't need that. You can process your anger in other ways. And that is something that is just such a liberating realization on so many levels. If you are feeling angry about someone who bullied you at school, if you are feeling angry about a situation that occurred years ago and you're not even in contact with anyone anymore that would be able to bear witness to that situation and say that they remember it, if you're angry about something that happened so long ago that you're not even the same version of yourself anymore, you can still process that anger. You can still do that anger. You can still find an outlet for it. And it can be spiritual, it can be artistic, it can be therapeutic in nature, it can be all of those things. You do not need that person to sign a permission slip for you to get your anger out, and you don't need that person to acknowledge it for you to feel better. So many people just bury their anger. They bury it, they suppress it, because they convince themselves that there's only one real way to allow it that exit wound, and the only way to allow that exit wound in that person's mind is to send it towards the person or people that were the apparent cause of it. But if you can paint, if you can write, if you can make music, if you can stamp your feet on the ground, if you can dance, if you can scream, then you can express that anger. Anger can be sacred. Anger can be righteous. Whole amazing political movements and wonderfully progressive, useful, kind, compassionate ideologies have been born of anger. And that's not an original thing, I know, for me to say, but it's true. Anger can be sacred, but we've got to watch how we're using it. We've got to watch how we're channeling it. If we're only using it to intimidate, to humiliate, to manipulate, if we're only using it to keep ourselves caged in isolation, to protect ourselves, or to lash out at others, then the high likelihood is that we're not using our anger in the most appropriate way. We could be using it to explore the other emotions that are going on deeper down inside, holding space for the anger but not dropping anchor there, actually moving on into the other emotions which are very likely crowded behind the big figure of anger that's at the front, and actually giving space for all of those things to find their expression and find their outlet, as well as using anger to promote justice, to pursue what is right, and to make things better, to restore balance in the world, to restore balance in our lives. If you're struggling with anger, whether it's just a case of not being able to express your anger, or finding that you're expressing it too much, or you're expressing it towards the wrong people, then I would really urge you to think about what you've learned about anger over time. So much of the way that we process our anger and feel about anger is conditioning. It's about what we were taught by our parents. And it's not just about aping what we were taught by the adults around us, the family dynamic and all that kind of thing. It's also about recognising when we are behaving in a way that allowed other family members the chance to vent their anger through us. So in some circumstances, for example, you may find that you followed the exact programming that was laid out for you by a parental figure or some other family member, some caretaker or whatever, and you actually process your anger the same way that they do. But in other situations, you might find that you are the person that actually ended up processing the anger that one of your parental figures was unwilling or unable to express themselves. And that's something a lot that can happen. That's something that can happen so much more than I think people realise. If you look back at the things that you were taught about what it means to be angry and what the emotion of anger actually represents, you might find that you were taught that it's shameful to be angry. You might find that you were taught conversely that it's empowered to be angry and that it gives you some sense of agency, some sense of control. Maybe there was a family member who was constantly angry and constantly wielding their power over the other members of the family in that way, and so now maybe when you feel disempowered you do the same thing. But there's also this other side to the equation, isn't there, where other people are scared to be angry, they're scared to to process their emotions, they're scared to be authentic, and maybe you were almost kind of like the scapegoat, the whipping child, if you will, that did all of that on behalf of somebody who wasn't willing to do it, wasn't able to do it, or didn't want to rock the boat in the way that you were perhaps willing to do so. One thing that I realised in the latter stages of my journey with trying to heal from an addiction to rage, if you will, is that I was doing other people's anger a lot. Actually, there was so much darkness and abuse and secrecy and fucked up terrible things going on, threaded throughout the lines of my family. And as I slowly started to learn more about these things, and I started to learn more about the fact that trauma is transgenerational, and it came through my parents to me, and it came through their parents to them, I started to get angry about all of that fucking shit as well. I started to get angry about abuse that had been endured by others and secrecy that was being upheld by others. I was angry not only for me and what I was going through, but I was angry about what other people had been through. And I was just angry for everyone, on behalf of everyone, a lot of the time. And sometimes that is what's going on with people. They're actually processing familial anger. They're processing the anger of a generation. Sometimes you're processing the anger of your community, the anger of society at large. And all of those things can be a massive drain. And unless you are doing something to make that anger into a productive energy that is actually doing something, then you are very much kind of choking on it. You are being poisoned by it. If you have been directing your anger at the wrong person and you need to say sorry, and you can say sorry, then say sorry. But also make sure that you apologise to yourself and that you forgive yourself. It's so important. If you feel guilt about the way that you've processed your anger, the way that you have been expressing it, the way that you've been behaving because of it, it's so important that you make sure you don't carry guilt and shame around with you. It's okay to feel guilty about your behaviour for a while, but that's part of a process. You cannot stop there. You have to make sure that you hug yourself close, and kind of realise why you did the things that you did. Understand why you felt that was your only recourse at the time, or that was the only thing that you understood at the time, but you're willing to see things differently. You're willing to behave in a way that's more in alignment with your values and who you really are. On this channel in the past, at some point, I can't really remember when, but there was a time where I explained to people that my self-love journey came in two parts. And the first part was before the love of my life broke up with me, and the second part was after. And so what I realised about the first part of my self-love journey was that, as legitimate as it was and as amazing as it was, and everything that I learned as a result of it, what I learned about the first part of my self-love journey was that most of it happened while I was with this man that I was with for 4 years, and the relationship with him was no doubt game-changing, and it was awesome and no regrets, but we didn't end up staying together. And after we broke up in quite a dramatic and unexpected way, I realised that a lot of the self-love that I had garnered and cultivated was actually dependent upon being with him, and it was dependent upon our life together. Now, I'm not saying in any way that the first half of my self-love journey was somehow not legitimate, or it wasn't worth anything, or, you know, I don't think it was real. I definitely think I took some valuable things away from it, and I think that it was absolutely the start of something beautiful. But when I look at the way that it began and the way that it ended, I see that a lot of it was dependent upon the relationship I was having with this person. When this person left my life and I found myself in this situation where I felt like my future was a black hole, I literally couldn't believe it. I was in shock, and so was everybody else in my life. Everybody was in shock. Everybody was kind of mourning. I realised then that I had to start my self-love journey effectively all over again, because I realised that this time there had to be this other complete leg of the journey where it didn't rely upon anyone else to keep it going. It was about me and only about me, and I had to put myself at the centre of it. When I look back on that relationship with that gorgeous, compassionate, deep, generous human being that he was, I realised that I did a lot of growing where anger was concerned. I definitely had already been, you know, meditating and thinking on these things before I met him, and I still had a lot of work to do when I met him, but I definitely did a lot of that work while I was with him. However, it was a long way from over. I still used to really misdirect my anger. I still used to shroud myself in it. I used to have a shitty agenda when it came to anger. I just used it to, I don't know, manipulate things to my advantage almost. Or I mean, it would take too long to kind of give examples and explain, but maybe some of you can actually appreciate what it is that I'm trying to say. But it was not healthy. It wasn't like I was processing anger as part of an overall thing, and I recognised that it was part of a process, and I respected it for what it was, but I didn't lose myself to it. It was quite the opposite. I would still lose myself to it, and I would still become enraged, and I still directed my anger in all the wrong places. The reason I'm talking about this relationship is because after I came out of this relationship, obviously I realised that a lot of my sort of self-love and self-allyship had been dependent upon that person being with me and that person being in love with me and us being together. It was only after that relationship then ended that I realised that the self-allyship and the self-love had to be so many more layers deeper than I'd ever fucking allowed it to be. And that was the start of something really fucking righteous, when I was heartbroken and I was on the floor and I was sobbing in the fetal position and everything had just gone tits up. That was the moment, that was the real moment where I realised that self-allyship was something different, something I never even imagined it needed to be. And that was also the moment, I think, where I really took accountability for my problem with anger, and I really started to look at it properly. I truly believe that if people have problems with anger, whether it's about allowing themselves to express it or going too far into it and becoming swallowed by it, the way to deal with it is to be on your own side, be on your own team. Love yourself enough to recognise that your anger is not shameful, but your anger is also not something you should be curling up with and using as a tool or a weapon or a defence. I realised that my ideas about what self-allyship and self-love were had been dependent upon this connection, and that I needed to start from, you know, a much more profound level. I realised that my ideas about self-care, self-love, self-allyship, etc. had begun at a level that I thought was profound, but was actually kind of obvious and kind of shallow. Like if somebody's with you and they're really kind of talking you up and telling you how amazing you are, and they adore you and they look at you in that way, like they wouldn't be able to breathe if you weren't in the world, then I think it's very easy to begin the opening stages of a self-love journey. But it's also really easy to convince yourself that you've come to the end of that journey and you know what it's all about, when really you don't know shit. It's really when you're alone, when you've got nothing, when you feel destitute, when you've just been left for someone else, that's when self-love and self-allyship really becomes something that you either have or you don't. And when the fucking rubber meets the road, you know that it's not something that you've really truly developed. You know that it's something that was dependent on some external circumstance that you now cannot control and you now do not have at your disposal. And I think that was the moment for me where I started to take accountability in a much deeper way, not only for my anger, but for everything else, because self-love is about taking accountability for everything you're going through, everything that you're struggling with. Nowadays, when I'm angry, I really appreciate being angry because I know that I've got mastery over that emotion. I don't try and push it away. I don't try and push it down. I don't try and pretend it's not there. But I know now that I can sit with it. I know that I can question it. I know that I can put it in the hot seat and I can be like, okay, what is this about? Is it really about what I think it's about? Should it really be directed towards this specific situation or this specific individual? Or is it more likely that it's arrived because of something else that I'm choosing not to look at or I'm not currently seeing? So I can ask myself these kinds of questions because of the spiritual work that I've done. And I would say that it is mostly meditation, although it is a number of other things as well. It's reading about different things in psychology and, you know, becoming a witch again and really going there with that and making sure that self-love is about my connection with me and is not reliant upon my connection with another person. Because of all of that stuff, I have come to a place where I very often do not need to express my anger to somebody else because I can meet it out on my own and I can understand where another person is coming from. I have also found that when it is appropriate for me to express my anger towards someone else, I can do it in a way which kind of focuses on what that person has done that made me feel the way I feel, rather than focusing on who they are as a human being. So for example, nowadays it's very, very highly unlikely that I'm ever going to say to anyone, you are this kind of person and that's why I'm angry. I'm always going to say something like, in this situation, when these circumstances occurred, you chose to do this and it made me angry because. So much better, so much of a better way of communicating, you know, and it really says It's not you intrinsically as a human being, and it's not me intrinsically as a human being. It's this situation, and this is why, and can you understand my point of view? Obviously, if the other person says that they cannot understand your point of view and they think you're being fucking douchebag, then clearly, obviously, you're probably going to get even more angry and you're going to need to walk away and take a little time out. But walking away is okay. Taking a time out is okay. Expressing that you are not yet ready to discuss something is okay. And that's something that I worked out a long time ago, about a year or two after I started meditating. I remember that I would no longer be pushed into having discussions or confrontations about anything when I knew that I was still feeling it and I was still angry and I was still in that space of anger. I was not prepared to be drawn in anymore, and I was actually more comfortable to say to the person, I'm not ready to talk about this right now. Is it okay if I take some time and come back when I feel like I'm ready to express what I need to express, and also to hear what you need to say? And quite a lot of the time that would go okay. It's okay to say, I understand we need to have this discussion, but I'm not ready just yet. There's so much more that I could say, so many more avenues I could take this down. And of course I knew that was going to be the case when I started making this video. But I really hope that at least the people that have requested that I speak on anger can appreciate this video, and that there's something in there for those people. And of course I will return to this subject at other times, and I'd love to know what you guys think and what your experiences have been. So much love until next time. Blessed be. Thank you so much for listening.